All right. Good morning, Dad.
Good morning.
So it is now day 33 of the Iran war, and Trump is supposed to give an address to the nation tonight about the Iran war. What do you
Right.
think it's going to be about?
That's a tough one. I really don't know. I mean, uh, he's made a number of comments recently, and there have also been leaks to the press that suggest that it might be a declaration of victory, followed by withdrawal from the region, without actually achieving anything, quite the reverse. Trump has said things like, yeah, we can leave this. It doesn't matter if the Strait of Hormuz is still blocked. It doesn't affect us. Of course, that's not true. That's not true at all. As I think I explained in the previous podcast. Yeah, we are the world's greatest oil producer, but we are very much affected by the international market. And again, we're actually more vulnerable than some importers such as China, because we're such an oil sensitive economy. So if he believes that, he's sorely mistaken, but he seems to believe it. That may happen. Again, there are these statements that are being made, and even incredibly, Lindsey Graham said that it's time to wind this down, which I think is very significant. It almost doesn't matter what Trump says because he says it. He'll say anything and he'll contradict himself the next day or the next hour or in the same sentence. That's Trump. But Lindsey Graham is a little bit more disciplined, I think. And, he's usually on message for more war, more war, more war. So the fact that he said that, I think indicates one of two things. Either, he realizes this has been a disaster and it's time to pull out, even without convincing anything that can really be spun as a victory. Or that this is part of some sort of deception. They are actually planning to go in and on the ground because, again, those troops are being positioned in the region, and it may be that this is, again, in part of some sort of information warfare to get try to convince the Iranians that we're giving up, we're ready to pack our bags and go home, and maybe they'll let down their guard. Now, I don't think the Iranians are going to do that. I think they've learned their lesson, but maybe that's what's going on. So to go back to your original question, it could be a declaration of victory. And that would be good, which would be followed by an actual withdrawal. But it won't be. To the whole world will look at that and say that wasn't a victory. You've already done tremendous damage to the region and to the global economy, and the Iranians are not going to let go of the Strait of Hormuz. And they still have their demands that are met. Withdrawal from the bases, and you have these trashed bases. What are you going to do with them? So he still might do it. He's Donald Trump. He maybe convinces himself in his own mind, or he just realizes, damn, I'm stuck. Like he was looking for a way out, and he was thinking about, well, we could do, we get special forces. They got to do something great, and then we'll declare victory. And he was maybe, I hope, was constantly being told, oh, that's just not going to work, Mr. President. That's going to make things even worse for you. There's really no way. Our plan A didn't work. We don't have a plan B. There is no plan B. So perhaps there's enough awareness in his mind and understanding that he says, okay, I just got to get out of there. We can hope for that. But it'll be painfully obvious that it was not a victory.
Right. I mean, it seems clear that he wants to get out. He miscalculated, and now he has this huge mess on his hands, and he's panicking. But what everybody's saying, and what we've been saying as well, is like, he can't get out. That's the problem. How do you get out? Well, unless it's just a complete humiliating defeat. First of all, you left all of these Gulf Arab countries exposed and shown that you are not a reliable partner in any sense of the word. And your so-called greatest ally, Israel, is getting destroyed, and you have no ability to protect them. So it's just, is it possible? That's the big question that it keeps on coming up. It's like he wants to declare victory, and let's hope he does it. Says we won. Let's go home, and then we can all just say, "You said we won, Mr. President. Just get out of there. Just go. Just forget it."
Right.
And let's all get behind him on that. We'll all clap our hands and say, "Well, great job." Okay, but the thing is, our bases get ruined. The Strait of Hormuz is still closed. Iran, it doesn't admit defeat. They will kick us completely out of the region. It's just not possible, right? Is it in any way
Yeah,
possible?
I would say it's nearly impossible, right? Um, yeah, a big part of the problem is Israel. Is Israel going to and its supporters? Now, maybe there's some awareness in Israel that, oops, this didn't work out for us either. Okay, we'll just look at this as, okay, the first of many mowings of the lawn. As there's something that periodic, it's a very cruel term. They go in and blow up buildings, kill people in places like Gaza and Lebanon, and something they've done for many years. And this will just be, one of um, these mowings, so to speak. And then we'll go back in and we'll do it again sometime. In fact, there was some Axios reported a U.S. official using that same language again. And here's an example of the IDFization of the U.S. military, but saying that, yeah, we can just go back in later, like Trump is saying that nothing prevents us from going back in later, and they'll be weaker the next time we can just mow the lawn again. Use the same language. So it's possible that the Israelis are thinking, oops, okay, this really isn't working. We'll pull out, but maybe we can convince him later on to go back in. But it's not clear that the Israelis will stop fighting. There are other indications that they do not want the U.S. to leave now, and they want to continue to pummel Iran. And again, they just don't care about they don't care much about the Gulf states, or which are much more important to the U.S., or the price of oil. Again, they have their pipeline. Maybe it matters to them somewhat, but for them, that's all secondary. And so they may continue. They may want to continue the fight, and if that's the case, then Trump is going to be subjected to tremendous pressure from all the Israel firsters in this country, and especially within his administration. And if he manages, if he disregards them and he pulls out, and then it just becomes Iran versus Israel. Well, that's not a war that Israel can win. It's been bad enough as it is, with the U.S. with the 800-pound gorilla on their side. But if the gorilla leaves, it's just going to start to become lopsided, against Israel. And you could see Israel getting pummeled. And I just can't imagine the, any U.S. president withstanding the kind of pressure that would result from an instance like that. We just couldn't just let Israel get pummeled.
You couldn't. You can't imagine it because we don't. The sentiment towards Israel has changed so much now. In the past, it's impossible, but we can't imagine it, right? I mean, it would. I think it would be a popular move if the U.S. said, "Yeah, okay, Israel, you want this so much, you do it alone, not with our soldiers, not with our money." That would be so popular, So it's. I can imagine it. I mean, if we had someone like Thomas Massey as president or something like that, that's what would happen, and it'd be incredible. I know, but it would be popular. So I mean, it is. I think we just have to understand that the sea of opinion has changed completely here. People are supporting Iran more in this war. The whole world seems to be behind Iran, and for good reason.
Yeah,
and
not the government. So
Yeah, well,
and they do have the power. That's the thing. So it's just, you may be right. And there's always this possibility. Trump's a very erratic person. He might just get angry at the Israelis about this whole thing, and because it's clear that they played an outsized role in convincing him to do it, and he could just say, "Yeah, forget you guys." And it's we'd try to help you out, but look, it didn't work out. It wasn't what you told me. You could see that. I can imagine it. And if that happens, where if he actually withdraws, just leaves Israel to continue the fight, and in spite of all the screams, and there's going to be a lot of screaming and a tremendous amount of pressure, if he withstood it and just said, "Forget it," I'm not going back in. It's your problem. Well, that would be a history making, a watershed event, if that. And then you could say, wow, we actually can thank Donald Trump for something. But I don't think that he's going to do that. He's just never shown,
Yeah.
that kind of fortitude. He maybe occasionally says some things which get us excited, but I just don't think he has the strength of character to withstand the Israel lobby. So the only way that he can get out of it, I would say, is if the Israel lobby themselves, if they conclude that, hey, this isn't working and this is actually starting to hurt our interests. Okay, it's best if we leave for now, with the idea of maybe going back in and just continually weakening Iran. But I don't know that they'll be able to do that. I don't
I was
I
about to
don't think
say
Iran's going to let that happen.
Right. That's the thing. You're saying that, like, well, Israel wants to keep this fight going. I think it's like, well, no, they don't have a choice because Iran's not going to stop. Why would they stop?
Right.
They know Israel's intention, the United States' intention. They have to win this now. And they are winning it. So they have no incentive to stop. So, and then Trump can try to declare victory. That I think you're probably right. That's what's going to happen. He's going to say, we did it. We obliterated them. They're
right.
back in the
Again,
Stone Age.
I'm not sure. I was saying there's one or two things. I actually forgot to mention the two. The second one is that he may say that, declare that, we're faced with this great evil or something and we have to double down and, something to that effect. And, there's going to be some pain at the gas pump. I know that. Because again, he never made his case. Maybe there are people who are telling him, you need to make the case to the American people for saying this war. That's a possibility. I guess I find myself leaning towards the other one, but
yeah,
we'll
but he can't make the case.
It may be just a whole show, which is, I think, more likely. It's like, you got to calm the markets, go in there and let them know, it's really, everything's okay. We're going to be out of there pretty soon. And then meanwhile, they have some sort of crazy scheme in the background where they're going to try to land troops on an island or something. Who knows? It's kind of hard to, rationally dissect, somebody who's irrational, and there's just a core of irrationality at this, in this whole operation.
Yeah, I mean, the only way that I can see it out for Trump is to throw Israel under the bus. I mean, if he tries to declare victory and says like, "Oh, well, we did it, hurrah!" But everybody's like, "In what sense could this possibly be a victory?" It's just so obvious that he can't keep that lie going, so it won't hold. And eventually, you're going to have to put the blame on somebody. And who do you put the blame at? You put it on Israel because it's very easy to, and everybody would be very receptive to it. The whole world would be like, "Yes, we know, we understand." But the vast majority, I'm just saying I think that is the consensus amongst the world. I mean, it's gone mainstream. I've mentioned just like, Joe Rogan talking to Dave Smith, just talking about how Israel got us into this war, how this is Israel's war. Like that is how most Americans see it now. And so lean into that. And so that, I think that's his only out, but you would just see, how bad are those Epstein files? What do they got on you, Trump? What will they keep you? What do they have over us? Or are you just afraid for your life? Is it something else, your legacy that they'll destroy? But I think that's the situation we're in. It's like, we can't leave. He'll do what he can to try to leave, but it's just,
right. I think the only way that he can leave is if the Israel lobby, if they themselves conclude that, hey, this is actually hurting us now. We need to pull out for the time being. And they might just say, okay, right. I think that's the only way he could leave.
Right. Well, Alexander Mercouris, I was listening to him. He was saying like the way out for Trump is to call up Russia, call up China, all these great powers and say, I need help, and these are the countries that have leverage and that they can get it done if we really did it. But obviously there'd be some huge concessions, basically probably an acceptance of the multipolar world and come out with some big framework. And then, if he did do that, then he could spin it off as a huge victory. Like, look, the age of U.S. hegemony is over. We're now entering into this new wonderful multipolar world.
I don't see him saying that.
I don't know. But do you think that's possible, that there is any way that would happen? But I mean, also, Trump's just burned the bridges with Russia and China so much. I just don't see that they would want to, why would they want to end this? I mean, the argument is that the global economy is imploding,
Right. Yeah, no, they would, they stand on the side of Iran. They may pressure Iran to make some minor concessions, but they would insist on major concessions from the U.S. That's what I would expect. And those major, the big ones are really the real substantive ones are the withdrawal from the region, and then the Strait of Hormuz, and Iran's made it clear we're just not leaving. Period. Now we have taken control of the Strait of Hormuz, and we are going to remain the tollkeeper here. The gatekeeper, and that's it. If you want to cooperate with us, great. If not, you're not going through. They understand that that's the leverage they have, and they've demonstrated that there's really nothing that anybody can do, and nobody can do anything about that, right? So I think that's just not going to change. They'll, and then it's also
that means what?
Yeah, go ahead.
Just talking about the control of the Strait of Hormuz. Is the objective here for the Iranians to? First of all, they're getting money, like $2 million a ship, so it can finance the war for them. But more so, are they in the process of rapid de-dollarization, of de-dollarizing the whole world? Is that the goal?
Yeah, my understanding is that some ships are allowed through free. Actually poorer countries that are friendly to them,
like Malaysia.
Pakistan.
I saw.
Yeah,
in Malaysia,
right, and a few others. And, other countries have to pay a toll. It's maybe $2 million, which sounds like a lot, but there's a huge amount of oil in these tankers, and it comes out to like $1 a barrel. So it is something they can pay, and it really doesn't make that much of a difference. It helps Iran a lot, and it doesn't really significantly affect the price of oil. So, yeah. Anyway, I actually forgot your question, but I think maybe I answered it.
Saying is the plan to de-dollarize? Is that the requirement?
Okay, right.
Like,
yeah, that's the other thing. Right. They also, transactions have to be in yuan, not in dollars. I think that's another.
Is it specifically?
I don't know if there's been an official statement, but there have been reports to that effect. That may be part of it. Yeah.
Then Iran's won, right? If we can't open it, and that will force the world to de-dollarize, right? That is a checkmate move by Iran.
Yeah,
right?
Well, to a great extent. Yeah, it doesn't mean that it obviously will be a huge blow to the dollar that's already showing some fragility right now. I would say that would be a real obvious victory for Iran, and I don't know. Again, it's just shown that the U.S. can't do anything about it. You have Donald Trump screaming at the Europeans, you go in and fix it. Well, the Europeans are looking, look, you have a much more powerful Navy than we can. And you told them to go in, and they told you, no, it's too dangerous. So what are you talking about? No, you can't do it. It's just that, just look at a map. It's this Strait of Hormuz is completely under the control of Iran, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let me just read this Trump tweet from yesterday, because it just shows you just how crazy Trump is right now, and just I think how panicked he is. So this is the tweet from yesterday. All of those countries can't get jet fuel because of the Strait of Hormuz, like the United Kingdom, which refused to get involved in the decapitation of Iran. I have a suggestion for you. Number one, buy from the U.S. We have plenty. And number two, build up some delayed courage, go to the Strait, and just take it. You'll have to start learning how to fight for yourself. The USA won't be there to help you anymore, just like you weren't there for us. Iran has been essentially decimated. The hard part is done. Go get your own oil. President Donald J. Trump.
Right.
I had to check on True Social just to make sure that was real. I'm like, it's not real, right? It's not legit.
Oh, no.
Of course it's real.
Of course it is, right? Yeah. I know earlier you were saying like he needs to blame somebody. Well, right now he seems to be blaming the Europeans. That he's furious at the Europeans, and even talking about pulling out of NATO as a consequence of this. Again, there's no reason that NATO should back him up. You talk about Article 5, but that's if a member is attacked, not if a member attacks another country. Are they afraid? And this is way outside of the North Atlantic, far, far from Europe.
Yeah.
So, it's
I
absurd.
heard Marco Rubio talking about that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, no, it is crazy. Marco Rubio as well, just saying like, well, what's the point of NATO? They're not helping us out. We're just there to help them. But then when we need their help, they don't come. It's like, yeah, you attacked another country. Why
Right.
would they? Like that's not how NATO works. It's not
Right.
an offensive alliance. Well, I guess, I mean, in a
Well,
way, it's
yeah,
kind of has been. You
yeah, and
know.
in some cases it has, and that's why the we have the Ukraine war. Uh,
Yeah. Well,
well, just
I
to
think
mention that,
you
yeah,
know.
go ahead. Yeah.
You go ahead. No, you go
Okay. Yeah, I
ahead.
was just saying, we just when we mentioned, I just mentioned the Ukraine war, it just reminded me of the some of the parallels between the two situations between the Middle East and Ukraine, or you could say Russia and NATO. It's just that, okay, you see um, um, all these bases, there are a lot of bases there, are right there, in the very near vicinity of Iran. They've been established over the course of decades, and they're just clearly really directed at Iran. So we have bases in Iraq, Kuwait, all the Gulf states. And Iran was weak. It couldn't do anything about it. But now, it was backed into a corner, and now it's striking out. It's something that was not always unacceptable to it, but it just didn't have the strength to respond. So it really is analogous to like the expansion of NATO eastward, where we're pushing our bases forward right up against the Russian border. We want to do the same thing that we did to Iran. Now Iran is undoing it. In the Ukraine war is a process of preventing that from happening. They're really, really very similar on that level.
Yeah, no, it's so clear to me now that just the U.S. empire is over. We can't hold it together, and I just hope that we can accept that. It's the quicker that our leaders can just understand and accept that, then we could just skip all the danger and work on being part of this new multipolar world and being prosperous and peaceful with our neighbors. But it just doesn't seem like they can let it go, right?
Yeah.
They can never let it go. It's
Yeah.
impossible.
Right. Well, this is, again, if Trump is really going to just pull out, it's going to be a huge blow to U.S. credibility, and to his ego. Maybe in his case, the ego is more important, but any U.S. president would find this very difficult to do. So I am not sure that he can do it. I don't know what he's going to say tonight, whether it's going to be truthful or he's going to be lying in a quarter, in an effort to maybe calm the markets or to cause the Iranians to let their guard down or something. We'll see. Um, but if he in fact declares victory and starts to move out, well, I won't be shocked because maybe that's just the only thing he can do because, this terrible fix that he's got in. But it will be a major, major blow to U.S. credibility and to Donald Trump personally.
And then Israel will get wiped out, right?
I don't know that they'll get wiped out, but they will, it's the same thing. It will be a blow to their, again, aura of invincibility. Because I'm sure that the Iranians will continue to pummel them and they can be able to do it more effectively without the U.S., constantly attacking them, if in fact the U.S. does pull out. Now, there is actually a precedent for the U.S. pulling out and just letting a country continue to attack Israel. And that is, of course, the Houthis in Yemen. We had, back in the spring of last year, we had spent 7 weeks bombing the Houthis. And in the end, a ceasefire was agreed to. And the Houthis, for the most part, not entirely, but stopped their operations in the Red Sea. But they didn't stop attacking Israel. And in fact, they picked that part of their, operations picked up. So Trump, pulled the fleet out and then the Houthis just went after Israel. So, maybe we'll see something similar.
Yeah, but the Houthis couldn't do the amount of damage that Iran can
Oh
do.
yeah, of
You
course,
know,
right. They did very little damage. I think there was one missile that
right.
hit Ben Gurion that caused some serious disruptions for the Israelis, but other than that, not much. No. Iran, when it comes to missiles, is easily 100 times more powerful than Yemen.
Right, and they're conducting this horrific ground invasion into Lebanon that is not going well. This will backfire. So I just don't see Israel has conducted itself with such barbarity over the past couple of years. I mean, really, its whole existence. And now that it's getting hit, I don't think people are going to let Israel just get away with it. You know, they adopted the strategy, the wall of iron. We have to make everybody submit to us, and we will kill. We don't care about killing women, children, you know, your cattle, whatever it is. We scorched earth is their policy.
Mhm.
And if you adopt that policy and you're engaged in a conflict constantly with your neighbors like this, and you begin to lose, I don't think you can
Yeah.
just sort of say, hey, let's just go, you know, let's just, this is call timeout, guys, and go back
Yeah.
to just where we were. We'll go back. And I don't even know if they will go back. That's the thing. They're so crazy in Israel.
Yeah.
It's like, will they ever go back? You know, if they go up to the Litani River, will they ever go back? If history tells us anything, no, they won't. So
Yeah.
they, I think they're in trouble. And when things start to swing the other direction, and there's been reports as well from Israel saying that the IDF is on the verge of collapse. You know, like they don't have the manpower to sustain this. We know that Israeli society is suffering. I was listening to Ted Postal on Glenn Deason, and he's just talking about what the Iranians have done by wiping out the radars and having very little warning time between these. And they don't know exactly where the missile is. They know one's incoming, but they don't know, is it going towards Tel Aviv or is it going towards Estarot or wherever it is. It's like, okay, they have to have the whole nation go down into a bunker now, or the whole south of Israel go down. And you're
Right.
doing that multiple times a night. You cannot sustain yourself like that for
Right.
very long. It's a small country. The economy is collapsing. People are getting upset. They're suffering real damage. There's no sign of victory. There's over 100 Merkava tanks that have been just blown up in southern Lebanon because they apparently didn't pay attention to what's been going on in the Ukraine war the past 3 years and just rolled in their tanks like it was 1945 or something. You know, it's ridiculous. They're
Right.
in trouble.
Yeah. Yeah. They certainly are in trouble. I don't think there's any risk of immediate collapse. But they may, they have perhaps bitten off more than they can chew in southern Lebanon. You know, that again, Hezbollah is proving that they're very resilient, and they are inflicting a lot of damage on IDF forces in southern Lebanon. Now, it's just horrible. I mean, what they're doing, again, they're demolishing like all the homes. Again, a lot of these are, historic villages and everything. They're just turning them into rubble, everything south of the Litani River. And they're saying essentially you can't come back. There are 1 million refugees now within internally displaced people within Lebanon. They have hit or killed, I believe, 3 UN peacekeepers. These UN peacekeepers have been completely useless. They're so scared of offending Israel, and they never fire back. And now the Israelis actually have killed 3. Before they had injured it. I remember in the previous conflict they had injured some. This time they actually have killed 3, and the UN can't actually get themselves to point a finger. It's like people were killed. It's the use of the passive voice again. They've done that, and then in, farther north in Lebanon, north of the Litani River, they have been striking ambulances. Many medical personnel have been killed. Again, you would say with most countries, that's probably an accident. With Israel, we saw what they did in Gaza. It's deliberate. It's just part of, making life miserable for those people. And, wiping out families, it continues. It's horrific. Well over 1,000 Lebanese have been killed. A couple hundred of them, I believe, are children. And then I just saw this morning a report that they said, okay, well, it's only Shia have to leave. Okay, we will let the Druze and the Christians back in. Okay, but the Shia can't come back in. And just telling that, actually urging the Christian communities and Druze communities to essentially, separate themselves from their Shia neighbors. When in general, like relations are really very good, but they're trying to create this sort of apartheid system. Now, all these things are so horrible. There's just outright ethnic cleansing, outright sort of, apartheid, and you just don't hear a peep, or maybe you hear a peep. That's all I'll say from the Europeans and Western liberals. It's just they know they can get away with with murder, and they do it, every day. So they just don't care. Um, but yeah, this is a major operation. It's horrible what they're doing, but it requires a lot of manpower. They've called up, they said they're going to call up 450,000 reserves. It's not clear that how many people are actually showing up because they're just so worn out, from these campaigns. So they are on the edge, and their economy has suffered a lot. There was through this conflict, my understanding, I think, again, Patricia Marin says this because you get these numbers during the conflict, but afterwards you go back and you find out it's always more. And says there were studies that were done after the 12-day war, and it came out to be something like, when you're just looking at the military part of it, it was $1.5 to $2 billion a day. That Israel spent. That's a huge amount of money for a country the size of Israel. And then on top of that, these constant disruptions to daily life and the damage that's being done to the civil infrastructure is also very costly. It's about $3 billion a week. And so that's adding up. Again, these are huge sums for, again, a small country like Israel. Of course, they have the backing. The U.S. always, sends emergency packages of tens of billions of dollars. But but still, it is hurting them. There's no question about it. And the longer this war goes on, again, it just affects kind of the whole image of Israel as a safe place for investment and other things, just like the Gulf states are being affected. Dubai and the UAE in particular had cultivated this image of being a safe kind of oasis within the Middle East, where, it was a rich people's playground, and it was also a place, where you could do business. And that model was very, very successful, but I think it may have been just, if not destroyed, greatly damaged by this war. And the same thing you can say for Israel.
Do you think that there's any way, when this is all said and done, that Israel still exists as a state?
I think it'll still exist as a state. It'll just be, it's on a downward trajectory.
Explain. But how?
I think at some point the attacks but Israel may have to make some real concessions. That's the thing. And it finds that if the U.S. pulls out and it continues, I think that would be the worst thing for Israel. And then Donald Trump does not go back in. Okay, yeah, they're going to put themselves in real kind of existential danger. If they stop with the U.S., it's not clear, of course, that the Iranians will stop. The Iranians will, want to exact a price from them. They are in a real fix, and that's why we've talked about why both the U.S., why there's going to be this temptation. There could be this temptation, for Israel and for the U.S. to use nuclear weapons.
Right. We come to that. So, you say you think it will, because it almost seems like that Israel will still exist as a state, that it probably it will, but it just, when it sounds like such a grandiose, hyperbolic statement to say will Israel exist? I don't think so after this. But if we just look at it, rationally, I think every time I ask myself that question, I don't see how they get out of this, because even, first of all, the U.S. and Israel seem to be concession incapable. They can't make concessions. It's just not the way that we operate. And then the thing is, even if we do, there's no trust. Why would Iran trust anything that Israel says after we've seen them? That's all they've been doing the past couple of years, is just lying about their war crimes 24/7, lying about their ceasefires. Everybody knows it's such a joke. Anything that the Israelis say, you just have to believe the opposite. So why, in what world would Iran, and the same thing with the United States, what world would Iran make some kind of agreement with the United States? We talked about, Lindsey Graham finally saying we want peace, but we've always had this expression that everybody says in the dissident community, the neocons have no reverse gear. We've seen what happened. We negotiate with them. We did a sneak attack during the negotiations. We go back into another negotiation and we do another attack. Iran knows its lesson. Why would they ever stop? They know that they have to win this now. And how they win it is destroying the Zionist entity. And in that sense, it frees the United States as well. It's destroying the U.S. empire along with Israel.
Yeah.
And that's where
Well,
this is, I think, is
yeah.
has to go.
Okay, like I'm saying, it's conceivable. I think it's very unlikely. Let's say that the U.S. could leave and then Trump would just let Israel and Iran duke it out, which would obviously be in Iran's favor. Again, I offer the precedent of the Houthis last year. He left them and he let them just attack Israel. Of course, they couldn't do much damage, and Iran's going to be very different. But he let that happen, right? I can conceive of that. I think that would be very difficult for him to do. But I cannot conceive of Donald Trump or any U.S. Administration allowing the state of Israel to actually to fall, to be defeated in a war, to actually lose territory. I just can't see that
They brought it on
happening.
themselves,
I know they did, but I just can't see that. I just think, if it looks like, go back to the Yom Kippur War in 1973. For a while, it looked actually rather doubtful what the outcome of that war was going to be. Syria and Egypt were actually gaining the advantage against Israel. And when that happened, the U.S. just rushed arms to Israel to save the day for Israel. And I think that, that was actually this Israel now that exists now has an even greater hold on, our administration, on our government. And so if they are really threatened, we will just prevent them from falling at this stage anyway. Maybe there's a future administration that I can't see, some years down the road from us where we could just say, forget it, they deserve what they get or something. But that's just I just don't see that happening now.
Yeah, but you're saying prevent them from falling, but they can't prevent Israel from falling. That's the whole problem. That's this whole discussion we've been having is like, what choice does Trump have? He can't get out of this war. There's nothing he can do. We can't open the Strait of Hormuz. We can't stop the drones. We can't stop the ballistic missiles. So we're talking about these crazy Mission Impossible, go in and steal the uranium or land on an island. But even that is just so insane that I think even Trump is realizing, yeah, this is stupid. It doesn't even make a good Hollywood movie, this idea, So it's just, there's nothing we can do. It just leads us to the nuclear option. But the nuclear option also it means also the end of Israel. And listening to Ted Postel as well and Glenn Deason, it sounds like he seems pretty confident that they do this, Iran will be able to nuke Israel quickly, that they will be able to come back.
Right. Well, again, it's scary. If it comes down to it, I think we would resort, either the U.S. or Israel would resort to the use of nuclear weapons before, we would allow Israel to be defeated. I think that was clear. With the case of Israel, there's no question about it, but I think it's also maybe true of the U.S. So, again, I'm not saying that will happen. Maybe there's some other way out. Maybe, Israel, let's say the best case scenario is just tonight, President Trump declares victory. This was the most awesome campaign in the history of the U.S. military. We've achieved great things. We went way beyond what we expected. We've done so much, and that we've removed this threat. We've saved the world. And the stupid Iranians, they won't talk to us. Well, to hell with them. We're going home because we've done our job, mission accomplished. And if the Strait of Hormuz stays closed, that doesn't matter to us. Of course it will, and that's one of the problems is that people are going to notice, at the gas pump that it is mattering. But but let's just say he says that, and Israel has just kind of sees the writing on the wall, and they also halt their attacks. And Iran maybe pummels them for a while, but feels like it's made its point, and then but maintains control of the Strait of Hormuz, starts to make deals with the different Gulf states who just see, again, they just accept, okay, there's a new sheriff in town here. And Qatar is maybe the first one that might do it. It looks like they're already trying to, patch things up with with Iran, and then probably the UAE would be the last, but maybe all of them are just going to fall into line. And then we have this. Now it's going to be so painfully obvious that the U.S. suffered a stunning defeat, and so did Israel. That's going to be really hard to bear. You can hardly see that out, but that would be the best outcome, let's just say. And then we could be spared all these doomsday scenarios. But there's so many chances, so many ways this could go wrong, and that it could eventually go nuclear or take us to
I
the
know,
threshold.
I know you're always trying to give us a balanced view and offer the alternative, but like what you just said there, that's not, you're really going out on a limb, right? Do you actually believe
Right. I'm
that's
just saying this is the
possible?
very best. I'm trying to imagine the very best, but like I say, I know there are so many problems, so many obstacles to this happening. And so, yeah, this can go off the rails in so many ways so easily. And I don't even know if there's an intention to do this. It's not clear. They maybe be set on one of these crazy ground operations. We just don't know what's going on behind the scenes. There's always, like, before these attacks that have occurred in the past, there's been a lot of smoke blown, and then there's all this talk about maybe a settlement or whatever, and then bam, they attack. And so that may be happening again. And then, yeah, even if he does that, it just may, I'm just kind of painting the rosiest scenario possible. I know. So I'm not saying this is likely. I'm not saying anything is likely. This would be the very best outcome that I can conceive of. But it's not likely.
Yeah, you're grasping at straws. The world's we're in a real pickle. Like I ask you that. I always
Right.
ask
Well, I
you,
mean,
like,
this
how
would
do
be
we?
bad for the U. I mean, even the rosiest scenario, that I'm presenting would be terrible for the U.S. as it understands itself, and Israel. It would be a huge loss. And the thing is, are they going to be able to digest that and, accept it? And I don't think they can. Right. That's a problem. That's why this rosy scenario that I've been painting is very unlikely. I don't think they can
Yeah.
accept that.
So yeah, it just seems like we're just on this path of escalation, and the path of escalation leads to potential nuclear exchange. And so this is very
Yeah.
terrifying. But
Yeah.
even if we avoid this, I was just listening to a bit of I've been listening to a lot of Glenn Deason recently. I like his interviews. Got that
Yeah. They're very good. I agree.
Norwegian stoic kind of flat line, It's like, all right, I trust this guy. But he was talking to Michael Hudson, and Michael Hudson was just saying, like, yeah, we're screwed. The world economy, like, it's what's happened is already catastrophic. We're looking at like a global depression. I mean, just the ripple effects of what's happened right now. But we've talked about some oil going through the Strait of Hormuz, but from my understanding, like urea, stuff that's required for fertilizer, is not moving. And so much of it comes out of here. So we're talking about, food shortages as well. We're talking about massive inflation globally. So we're talking about, the Great Depression globally. So that's already kind of baked in, and that's where we are right now. And we're just doubling down on these bad decisions to make it worse. Let's blow up more, energy infrastructure in Iran and just continue to escalate. And so it just seems like, that we are just in real trouble. And I don't know. So that's the one kind of real wild card, I think, is that once the global economy starts going to free fall, then you sort of activate all these other actors in the world to put pressure and to make moves and to change. Be like, okay, we got to contain the U.S. and Israel. This is a problem. Everybody kind of moves in together now because, like, hey, we didn't like what you're doing in Gaza, but, it's so far away we can't do it. Now our countries are suffering because of your stupidity, your aggression, your barbarity. We're ending this. And so that, maybe that will lead into some other kind of calculation, and there could be some more moves to isolate the United States.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a big, that's a huge factor. It's just, the pressure of the world community, will the true international community, when that phrase international community is used, it's usually just, American-led Western hegemony. It's actually just a kind of a euphemism for that. But maybe if the real international community, the global majority, and actually even the Europeans, because they are not happy with this. Obviously, they're pathetic. They're like the Gulf states. I think there's a lot of similarities there. But they're not happy about it. And there are those that want Iran to pay the price. People like the UAE and Keir Starmer and all of them. But that's just not going to happen. And it may be that they just come to see that, okay, yeah, this is different. We have to make a real deal with Iran. We have to listen to them. We have to make concessions to them. We're going to have to accept their control over the Strait of Hormuz, and the U.S. and Israel be damned. That's not impossible. And again, you'll have the two great powers, Russia and China, very much on the side of that. And they may be able, look, we have a global emergency. This was caused. You didn't see that in the UN resolutions, unfortunately, but as time goes by, everybody knows who started this war. And then there's just the fact there was this hope that Iran would just would give up or whatever. And as Iran demonstrates resolve, it's understood. Wait a second, they're not just going to go. We're going to have to deal with them. So let's just hope. With that this, again, maybe this is another rosy scenario. They leave, but then the world community starts to actually put real pressure for the first time on the U.S. and Israel to cede to their demands, and it may be. Again, it's going to be very hard for them to do. They couldn't do it just to Iran. I just can't see them saying, okay, yeah, Iran, you get what you want. But if you have, a great majority of countries, backed by the great powers and whatever, they just might have to accept it. They just say, okay, yeah, we're going to, we would have a new order established in the Middle East where Iran is going to play a dominant role. That would be quite extraordinary. Not impossible, but again, there's going to be a lot of screams and a lot of efforts to prevent that from happening. I'm sure that there are people in the U.S. administration that are now, who, unlike Donald Trump, are capable of thinking a few moves ahead and see this possibility and say, how can we prevent this from happening? This would be such a blow. This would be the end of U.S.-led hegemony. We cannot let that happen on our watch. And, that's the problem. It's just not something that they're going to let happen easily. We can hope for it. It's not impossible, but they're going to fight it tooth and nail. They're going to look for any alternative up to and including nuclear weapons. I'll just say that again. But that may not solve. That may just make it worse for them.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's hope that the global community unites and is able to I view like the U.S. and Israel as just as mental patients, and I think that the world needs to act as orderlies and control and they need to do this collectively. Like, how do we contain this? Because these two countries, my country, unfortunately, and Israel, are a real threat to the world right now. They've been for a long time, but I mean, we're talking about nuclear exchanges possibly happening. We need to hopefully we'll see people step up before that happens. We'll hope we'll see a country step up. But I think when I see Trump make these statements saying like, oh, we're going to be out in 2 or 3 weeks, we can end this, it seems like a lot of people still believe it. It seems like the markets still respond like, oh, we can extract and get out of here. Can you see me?
Yeah, I can see.
Okay. Yeah, it seems like they still have that belief, but I don't know why they don't understand. When someone like Michael Hudson's saying that, yeah, we're screwed. Already what's happened, we're going to global depression. Then why does the stock market still think that like, oh, Trump's going to end this and everything's going to go back to normal? I think a lot of people do believe like, oh, this is, all right, we made a mistake, but we can just call it quits and go back and things will be back to the way they were. We were in the Vietnam War for 9 years and we pulled out and then we were still number one and it was fine.
Right.
Can you explain to us why that's not the case?
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, I think the reason, I don't know why anybody pays any attention to anything that Trump says. And he's always giving positive spins to everything. Again, we've talked about previous negotiations with the Russians, and he's always saying, oh, it looks like we're going to solve this problem in a couple of weeks. Originally, before he even became president, it was 24 hours. But it was just, he always made these ridiculous statements. So I don't know why anybody pays any attention to him. And in this case, I think he's just totally fabricating. There aren't any negotiations. Why but the market respond in this way. I think it's just sort of an old reflex. It's just like I'm saying, it goes back, and you mentioned there have been disasters like the Vietnam War, but the U.S. has always come out strong. So there's just a sense that the U.S. always survives. The U.S. will always be on top. The U.S. don't bet against the U.S. I think that this is something that's sort of ingrained in the thinking of a lot of investors around the world. Now we see that that's starting to change. For example, in the past, when there was a crisis like this, even when the crisis was caused by the U.S., there was a rush into the U.S. dollar. People were buying up treasuries, and that's not happening this time. So it already shows that there has been a shift away from the old thinking. But I think there's still a lot of that thinking left. Now, it's clear that the damage has been done. I don't know. And that it's like, even if today the closure of the Strait of Hormuz ended, it's going to take a long time for the global economy to recuperate. And maybe there's a thinking again, just at least within the U.S., that we are somewhat insulated from this. And if the oil starts flowing again quickly, we'll be okay. I don't know. I don't understand what goes on in the minds of these people. I can just kind of point to this institutional bias in favor of the U.S. And I think that's starting to come to an end. And this event, I think, will maybe be the end of that. I think we're seeing the last gasp of that kind of thinking, because this is not going to end well. There's just no way that it's going to end out well. And when it's all over, the U.S. will be greatly damaged. I think, we talk about our three pillars. All three pillars are going to taking a real beating from this. And then it's just going to be painfully obvious for the world to see. Now, I don't know if I answered your question or not, but
yeah, I don't know what was just saying, why, we can't go back to the way things were. It's just, it's done, it's
no, I don't think we can. I think that this, again, that there will be, we're seeing it happen in real time. U.S. credibility is suffering major blows. There's still people that I think maybe you can see that in the reactions of the market are trying to kind of hold on to that old thinking. But I think when this is all done and the dust finally settles, it's gone. It's just like the U.S. It'll be understand that, okay, the U.S. is not the same country anymore. It doesn't have that kind of that completely unchallengeable, preeminent position that it used to have.
Right. I saw a quote attributed to Kim Jong-un yesterday that said, "Iran has shined in this war. We urge them to do even more. The world is watching your victory. You have stunned everyone." 90% sure that's probably not a real Kim Jong-un quote. Someone just made it up. But regardless, I think that sentiment, though, does kind of capture a lot of the world. And it also kind of cracks me up a bit that sort of this Kim Jong-un probably is, over the past 4 years, has probably had the greatest rise. I'm not saying anything good about the North Korean government. I'm sure it's horrific there, and the way they treat their people and all that stuff. But it just from a meme level, I find it kind of humorous how Kim Jong-un has been sort of catapulted into the modern world in a sense, with great, powerful friends and partners,
Yeah. Well, I think also, just look at the cases of North Korea and Iran. They very clearly demonstrate that the only language that American-led Western hegemony understands is force. The North Koreans tried to work out some sort of deal with the Americans. They were willing to give up their nuclear option, but we torpedoed it. It really, it's just like we did a lot of the same things. We did not negotiate in good faith with the North Koreans. This, of course, occurred under previous administrations. And so they just went for a bomb, and they got the bomb, and then all of a sudden we respected them, and the Iranians have been trying to negotiate with us for decades, and they've held themselves back. They could have developed a bomb a long time ago. And they, again, they're their supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, prevented it. But now, they've just learned, I think they're seeing right before their eyes, the only way to get the U.S. to actually, maybe not openly, rhetorically, but to actually cede to any of your demands is through the use of force. We just had to, if they hadn't closed the Strait of Hormuz, if they hadn't trashed the American bases, Trump wouldn't be thinking about the possibility. He wouldn't even be thinking about the possibility of leaving. And, but here we are. I mean, it's just that in both cases we see that, okay, yeah, the language they understand is force. And I'm sure that many countries around the world are looking at that and reaching the same conclusion.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the U.S. is getting a bloody nose. Hopefully we will learn our lesson without going nuclear. I mean, this conflict, I mean, this whole conversation we had was, largely just speculative on just how do we get out of this? And I think that's just the question that we all need to be asking, and we have to find a way out, because if you start paying attention and going down, the trajectory we're going down, you see that nuclear, mushroom cloud on the horizon. It is a real possibility, and it's just, it's just this thing that we need to all think about. How do we get out of this? And we need to make sure that real solutions are there, because we are headed to a very, very bad place. I mean, it's already the damage is going to be is huge already. But let's just, as long as we don't send nuclear weapons, we can get out of this stronger and better. And it'll be so much better once the U.S. isn't in charge doing all these things. Just like if I kind of, if this is all said and done, and then China is the most dominant power, I will feel better, because China will have reached this dominant position without the backdrop of some massive military industrial complex like World War II, where we built up this huge thing, and then Eisenhower gave out that speech saying we have to be wary of the military industrial complex, and we weren't. And we saw what happened. It created the empire, and there was the USSR that helped propel things forward. So we just had all these bases and built it all over. China does not have that. And if it becomes this dominant power, it's like, yeah, well, they did it without having to engage in some massive military conflict. They just engaged in commerce, good business sense, infrastructure, allocating resources efficiently. That's what it'll be, and be like, okay, that's a great thing to have. It's not this idea of force, and the only way to counter that force is with other force, because that's the world that the U.S. has built.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, unfortunately it is. Yeah. No,
okay. Well, maybe we can end it there.
Well, let me just, if
okay.
It's okay, I'd just like to comment, could briefly jump over, we forget that there are so many things happening in the world that we just can't keep track of it all. We can't keep up with it all. I wanted to go very briefly to Venezuela, because I read a very interesting, long, detailed piece by Craig Murray, the former British ambassador to Uzbekistan. And he has spent the last 6 weeks in Venezuela. He went there, and he's been reporting on there, on things there. And he's just been wandering around. And one thing that he, first of all, reports is that he had been told that, okay, yeah, this is a kind of basically a police state, and there are security checkpoints everywhere. He said, like, the whole time he's been there, 6 weeks, wandering around, freely using cameras. Nobody's ever stopped him, said, "Who are you? Do you have your ID?" And then he's come across 3 or 4 security checkpoints. 2 of them right next to the presidential palace, one by a national park, that had to do with actually, I think, poaching or something like that. So, first of all, he's found, it to be a very free and open society. People are not afraid. There's no real police presence. It's not a police state. And he reports, the great majority of people support the government. They supported, maybe not the great majority, but the majority supported Maduro. And then those people that didn't like the government, they'll talk to him, and on camera will talk to him and say, I don't like the government for these reasons. Again, there's a complete lack of fear. Now, we hear a lot about, Delcy Rodriguez, and I've heard this stated actually within the dissident community, let's say the geopolitical dissident community, quite often. It's just sort of a statement of fact. Delcy Rodriguez, did a deal with the CIA and betrayed Maduro. That's what happened. Now, what's the evidence for that? Well, obviously there was some stand down order, but also there have been these reports that have come out in the Western press and direct statements from the U.S. that Delcy Rodriguez is our girl. She's doing what we tell her to do. Now, one thing that Craig Murray points out is that when we have a real let's say, asset in charge of a country. We don't say that. We don't, we pretend that they're actually free and independent and whatever, like with the Gulf states or whatever. So that should actually raise some red flags right there, that we keep on telling the world that, yeah, she's ours. And he finds that actually the whole Bolivarian system, which is this that was built up under Hugo Chavez and Maduro, is completely there, and it's a real thing. It's not just some rhetoric, but they have an entire social system that's very, very much in place, and people, again, I think the great majority of people there support. But in addition to that, just getting a feel for the society there, he actually spoke to a lot of people who were very close to Maduro, including his son, and other people associated with them. And nobody has shown any suspicion of Delcy Rodriguez. Remember, Delcy Rodriguez's father was tortured by the CIA. They say is very much committed to their system of government, to the Bolivarian vision. And And what he learned is that it wasn't that there was some sort of betrayal, but that actually it was Maduro himself that issued the stand down order when he heard that they were coming, that he did not want there to be mass violence. He knew that Venezuela was weak. And he thought, because there was an incident that occurred like 25 years earlier, Hugo Chavez was kidnapped in a coup. And then there was some sort of, a counter coup, or there was an uprising, and he ended up being brought back. And he thought that maybe this is what would happen, but that it was he himself that issued the stand down order. Anyway, I put that out there because I hear a lot of people just simply stating, okay, yeah, Delcy Rodriguez obviously betrayed Maduro. This was a setup, and now she's just a quisling. Saying no, it's again, this is somebody who spent 6 weeks there, and it also needs to be pointed out that another person who knows actually Venezuela quite well is Max Blumenthal and his wife. I think it was either him or his wife who interviewed Delcy Rodriguez and whatever, and they don't believe it at all. So anyway, people that really know Venezuela reject that whole theory, and I think it should be understood. So anyway, I just thought that I would put that out there. Now, the thing is, yeah, Delcy Rodriguez is in a difficult position because there's still this fleet off the shore. They're seizing all their oil. They're just taking it. And they're taking the proceeds from oil sales. It's now going, for a while it was going to some slush fund in Qatar. Now it's going directly into the U.S. Treasury. And then every once in a while the U.S. will give Venezuela a share. Maybe they make $500 million in sales, and then a month or two later, Venezuela sees half of that. That's what's going on. But they're just completely powerless. They don't have anything. So she is in a difficult position where she's just trying not to provoke the U.S. and this very mercurial, erratic personality, Trump, because they know that they really don't have the military to resist. And, say, okay, well, you could have a civil war and fight it out, but you're talking about, mass death and violence that could go on for decades, and they're just trying to avoid this. But at the same time, to keep their own social and political system in place, and just hope that over time there's eventually maybe a new administration or something happens where they can finally regain control of their oil.
Yeah. Well, I think everybody's just waiting for the U.S. empire collapse, and maybe they won't have to wait too long. Okay. Well, let's end it there, Dad.
Okay.
All right. Have a good rest of your day. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, you too. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.